It's already quiet for me. This is amazing. First time ever. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Marion Minor Cook Athenaeum. My name is Melanie Kalla, and I'm one of the 2024-2025 Woolley Athenaeum Fellows. Tonight, in honor of Veterans Day, we welcome Robin Bartlett. Robin Bartlett is a CMC alum from the class of 1967, and today he will be sharing a first-hand account of the combat and leadership during the Vietnam War. As a 22-year-old first lieutenant, Robin led a combat infantry platoon of more than 50 search and destroy missions in South Vietnam, often deploying into high-risk combat zones by helicopter. His experiences as a young platoon leader during the Vietnam War gives us insight into a rare modern perspective on the realities of war, both in the heat of combat and in the long-term impact on his life and his career. His book, Vietnam Combat: Firefights and Writing History, brings these vivid experiences to light, capturing the intensity, fear, and fierce brotherhood born out of war. His work has received numerous accolades, winning the 2024 Military Writers Society Award, the Army Historical Foundation Award, and the Independent Publishers Book Award. Tonight, Robin will take us back to critical moments, sharing insights on leadership and courage, and reflecting on the lessons he learned and has carried forward into his life and career. Robin's connection to CMC runs deep. A graduate of ROTC, he began his military journey here in 1963 and has since remained an active member of the CMC community, serving as an alumni interviewer and development outreach partner. Today, he is also the president of the New York and New Jersey chapter of the 1st Cavalry Division Association. We're fortunate to have him here to share his story, a story that gives us a deeply personal view of the Vietnam War from a boots-on-the-ground perspective. This Veterans Day presentation is co-sponsored by the Kravis Leadership Institute and the ROTC program here at CMC. As always, we ask that you please silence your cell phones and direct your full attention to tonight's speaker. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Robin Bartlett.
So I would really like to thank President Chodash and Jack Stark, Jill, for attending tonight, and also my mentor and faculty advisor, Dr. Payne, my mentor at CMC. I'm appreciative that my classmates, several of my classmates are here, and Jane with Dr. Payne. CMC staff, all my bosses, present and future and past, ROTC cadre, cadets, KLI students, CMC students. I'm really honored that you've come tonight. Today is Veterans Day, and it is a day set aside to honor all of our veterans, living and deceased, for their service and sacrifice to our country. And it's a bucket list day for me, because this is where it all began, some 57 years ago. Now, if you were hoping for a high-level view of the Vietnam War and analysis, you will be disappointed, because my story is boots on the ground. If you talk to other Vietnam veterans, their experiences may be vastly different from mine. So much depends upon the job they did and where they were in Vietnam. I'm going to talk about what it was like to lead a combat infantry platoon at the age of 22 on helicopter combat assaults and search and destroy missions in a war that was halfway around the world from Claremont. And recognizing that many of you were born after the Vietnam War, I've included a few slides that will provide some context to geography and a little bit of history. But let me start with a little bit about me. I come from a military family. My grandfather went to West Point. My father went to West Point. My brother went to West Point. I turned down an appointment to West Point. And after 13 elementary schools, middle schools, and 4 high schools, I had had enough of moving around and the Army. But when I came to warm, sunny, beautiful Claremont from rainy, wet, and dreary Seattle, and I know some people love it, but I did not. The Vietnam War was starting to escalate, and I had a family obligation to serve as an officer, an Army officer. Perish the thought I should ever consider the Navy or Marines. Sorry, Jack. A little bit about my book, and I hope you'll circulate the book and take a look at it. It took me 10 years to write this book. I had a family to raise, and I had a job as a salesperson that took me on long airplane flights, and that's when I found the time to write. I had a wonderful proofreader who was a classmate of mine from Scripps, and also a pre-publication reviewer from Pitzer. My Scripps proofreader found every misplaced comma, every misspelled word, and asked a whole bunch of WTF questions. And I figured if she didn't know what I was talking about, I needed to rewrite. Now, I hoped that by writing the book, it would be a catharsis for me. Turned out that was not the case. It actually brought back all of the stuff I was trying to get past. But talking about these experiences has helped me a great deal and has softened the edges of those experiences and helped me to overcome. I'm going to start my presentation with a video. I'm going to take you on a helicopter combat assault.
I was a combat infantry platoon leader engaged in helicopter combat assaults, search and destroy missions, and firefights with the 1st Cav Division Air Mobile at the height of the Vietnam War from 1968 to 1969. I was assigned as the 1st platoon leader, 1st Battalion, 5th Cavalry Regiment. I spent 7 months in the field leading my platoon of 28 to 32 men. At 22, I was the 2nd oldest man in my unit. We conducted search and destroy missions in I Corps, parallel to the DMZ, from the Gulf of Tonkin on the east to the Laotian border on the west. The terrain was a mix of sand and tumbleweed to 3-canopy jungle, dictating the tactics and formations we used. The Cav had more helicopters than all other divisions in Vietnam combined. The air mobile concept was originated during the Vietnam War and was designed to bring fresh fighting forces to the battlefield by helicopter assault. My unit also received priority support from artillery, Cobra helicopter gunships, and medevac during a firefight. This is what 3-canopy jungle looks like near the Laotian border. We had to cut our way through a mass of wait-a-minute vines, bamboo, and thorns. The humidity and heat were always oppressive. Sweat poured off, and heat stroke and heat exhaustion were always a real problem. My platoon was strung out, single file, along the trail, and the men tended to bunch up. This is the worst possible formation, and ambush is always a real possibility. It was impossible to see more than 5 to 10 meters to the front. Booby traps of various types were a frequent cause of injury. Under these circumstances, it was easy to lose focus and suffer casualties. If one of my men was wounded or collapsed due to heat exhaustion in the deep jungle, he has to be evacuated via jungle penetrator. There were no GPS in those days, and helicopter pilots had to find us based on map coordinates. If we popped smoke, it would hang up in the jungle canopy. To be located, we had to cut down trees using machetes and open a 10 to 12 foot hole. We tied a smoke grenade to the end of a long pole and held it up as high as possible to allow the smoke to penetrate the canopy. We also fired star clusters, similar to Roman candles, through the open hole and hoped that pilots or door gunners would spot us, come over, and drop the hook. Firefights were always frightening and confusing. Often, the jungle was so dense I could not see the enemy shooting at us. Returning fire, we had to be cautious of where the other men were located. Night firefights were the worst. It was impossible to know what was happening. I lay on the ground, trying to direct fire at an enemy I could not see. I called for artillery support, not knowing exactly where I was on the ground and adjusting the rounds by listening to where they landed, praying they did not land on top of me. I was afraid to move, afraid to be shot, afraid to die. But I knew I had to move, make decisions, and give orders. I had to give the order to attack, and sometimes that cost lives. Somehow, I reached deep into my reserve, followed my training, found courage, and a way to overcome. The famous actor John Wayne said it best: "Courage is being scared to death, but saddling up anyway." When it was over, I had nothing left in my tank. Exhaustion claimed our bodies as the adrenaline drained. I called for a medevac, took care of the wounded, and wrapped the dead in their ponchos. This photo was taken on my first worst day in Vietnam. It was the day when I lost my first killed in action, KIA. My job as the platoon leader was to fill out a 3x5 death card recording the coordinates where the soldier had been killed. I attached the card to his boot along with a dog tag and secured the poncho around him. A helicopter came in and we put the man on board for his long journey home. There would be more KIAs during my tour, and more men wrapped in ponchos, but this was my first.
So this is where it all began. And in May of 1967, I was commissioned as a second lieutenant, graduated as a distinguished military graduate, and earned my college degree on the same day. I was a smartass, a tough guy, and after all, I had a degree from Claremont Men's College. So I decided that I had never really been challenged by anything that I had done. And I volunteered for airborne ranger training and infantry and assignment to the 82nd Airborne Division. I got everything I asked for and more. After a month stay at after 2 days, I was driving across the country. Everything I owned fit in my car, en route to Fort Bragg, North Carolina. That's the home of the 82nd Airborne Division. I was there for a month and then received orders transferring me to Fort Benning. And it's named today after General Hal Moore, who is the creator of the air mobile concept. And he and author Joe Galloway wrote a wonderful book called We Were Soldiers Once and Young, and also made famous by a movie of the same name, starring Mel Gibson and Sam Elliott. Can you pick out which one is me? Anybody know? Oops. Cut the wrong picture. That's me. And I have classmates here. Dennis Mann is up here at the top. And Bob, where are you, Bob? You're here. I thought you were in here, weren't you? I don't know where you are. That was a long time ago. So after a month, went to Fort Benning, Georgia to jump school, 4 weeks in length. We started each day with a 5-mile run and 25 pull-ups in unison. And on the 3rd week of training, the most important class was the parachute malfunction class. No one fell asleep in that class. And on Sunday before jump week, it was standing room only. On the 4th week, I made 5 jumps and earned my paratrooper wings. This was followed by infantry officer basic course, 6 weeks in length, and I went through with the graduating class from West Point. West Pointers are called ring knockers. Colonel Cameron is a ring knocker. They're called ring knockers because when they stand at the podium and they want to emphasize a point, they always bang their rings against the podium. So they were called ring knockers. A mild animosity began between the distinguished military graduates who were infantry and the West Pointers. This escalated in Ranger School. Ranger School was divided into 3 phases. And at the end of each phase, there was a confidence test over water. This is the rope drop confidence test. For this test, you had to climb a 35-foot telephone pole, walk across a plank that had 3 steps in the middle, transfer to a diagonal rope, then transfer to a horizontal rope, reach out, touch the ranger's tab, salute the officer on the deck. Again, you were over water. Salute the officer on the deck below and request permission to negotiate. This is the rope drop confidence test. And you had to say that perfectly. And if you didn't, you kept saluting and saying it until you did. Then finally, the officer would say, do a pull-up and drop. So when you dropped, you yelled Ranger all the way into the water and entered the water without any air. The second confidence test was called the suspension traverse confidence test. This was at the end of the mountain phase. And basically, it's a zip line. You had to make very sure that when the officer lowered the flag, he's standing on the dock, that you had your feet up. Otherwise, you would smack right into the water face first. We started the course with about 120 officers and non-commissioned officers. We graduated 65. It is still the toughest training that the Army has available. And then at the end of the third phase was the night swamp navigation test. And here, you and your ranger buddy were dropped off along the edge of a very large swamp at 200-meter intervals at 8 o'clock at night. And you had to cross the finish line on the other side of the swamp by 6 a.m. the next morning. They had ranger cadre stationed, so if they caught you, then they had you go back to the starting point and start all over again. So the trick was to avoid the ranger cadre, walk into the swamp, maybe up knee level, maybe waist level, and then skirt around the swamp. If you tried to go through the swamp, you probably would still be there. And so my ranger buddy and I crossed the finish line by 6 o'clock, but there were others who did not. They were loaded onto trucks and buses and returned to Fort Benning. They were allowed to, their records show that they passed the course, but they were not allowed to wear the ranger tab. Ranger school took you to the point of physical and mental exhaustion and hunger. I lost 35 pounds, and then assigned you as the leader to carry out the mission. It taught you courage, how to endure, how to lead, and I came away with tremendous confidence. It was the best insurance policy an officer could have in Vietnam. And never once in Vietnam did I feel out of control. Don't get me wrong, I was plenty scared when the bullets were flying, but I still felt in control of the situation. I returned to the 82nd Airborne Division. I made 32 parachute jumps, 2 night jumps, and prepared to go to Vietnam. After 6 months, I was assigned to the 101st Airborne Division in Vietnam. They wanted to keep airborne officers in airborne units. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of a geography lesson because I know that some of you may not really be familiar. This is a country called Vietnam, and it's located here. China is to the north, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia. Let's zoom in a little bit. This now gives you a better idea of the northern part of Vietnam, the southern part of Vietnam. And this shows you the key countries that were adjacent to Vietnam, Cambodia and Laos. And zooming in on just where the war took place in southern Vietnam, South Vietnam, the American forces, we always had to organize things, so we divided the country into 4 core areas, I Corps, 2 Corps, 3 Corps, and 4 Corps, which was also called the Delta. And these are the cities or towns that I moved through upon my entry to Vietnam. This slide kind of gives you a little bit of a preparation to the buildup of the Vietnam War. In 1960, we had less than 1,000 soldiers in Vietnam, American soldiers in 5 KIA. They were mostly special forces and advisors. By 1967, we were just shy of 500,000 men, 11,000 casualties. In 1968, when I went to Vietnam, then we were over 500,000 and corresponding casualties. 69, we started to decrease. The turning point of the Vietnam War was the Tet Offensive of January 1968. And American forces and ARVN forces, that's the Army of South Vietnam, were totally surprised. Tet Offensives is like their new year. They were totally surprised by the North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong Army. The enemy forces occupied 200 cities throughout South Vietnam. And you can see that during this 3-week period, it took us 3 weeks to recapture those cities. And you can see that American and ARVN forces suffered 2,600 dead, 10,000 wounded. Civilian casualties were extensive, but the NVA and VC, it was a catastrophic loss for them. 60,000 killed was the estimate. But it was actually a public relations win for the North Vietnamese. Because we learned that up to this point in time, General William Westmoreland and President Johnson had been telling us that we were winning the war. And that was not true. We were not winning the war. A war of attrition, meaning that we were going to kill so many of them that they ultimately would give up because they didn't have any more soldiers. The truth is that we were lied to by our military and civilian leaders. After Tet Offensive, the American public did a 180-degree turn and turned against the Vietnam War and against the soldiers fighting it. And Walter Cronkite, who was recognized as he was the most recognized journalist in America, was called the Voice of America. He said that the most we could hope for was a stalemate. And Ho Chi Minh, who was the leader of North Vietnam, his prophecy came true, that when the United States pulled out after 11 years, we had given everything and gained nothing, with the exception of 58,276 names on the Vietnam War Memorial. Now I'm going to return to me. I arrived at the replacement depot called the Repo Depot in May 9th, 1968, and learned that all my orders were canceled. I was no longer going to the 101st, and I was reassigned to the 1st Cavalry Division. So the word on the 1st Cavalry Division was that we had more helicopters than in all of Vietnam. This allowed us to carry more water, more ammunition, and tremendous resupply by helicopter. The bad news was that occasionally we would be helicoptered into harm's way, into a hot landing zone. I arrived on May the 9th, 1968, and I returned on May the 9th, 1969. Now that was very unusual. You never served exactly 365 days. And why that happened to me, I do not know. I also want to mention that my wife was born on May the 9th, and my son was born on May the 9th, and I have played those numbers in every conceivable combination. I have never won anything. So ultimately, I went to the division forward after it pulled my equipment, got my equipment, my weapon, no ammunition, but equipment, and went through an acclimatization, 3-day training course, refresher training, trying to get used to the average 105 to 115 degree heat. We were told, officers and NCOs and non-commissioned officers were told not to make friends because you might have to send your men into harm's way. Platoon leaders' life expectancy at this point in time was 90 days due to snipers' attack. And the officer always typically walked 4th or 5th in line with the radio operator behind him. So the snipers learned very quickly to shoot the man in front of the radio operator, then shoot the radio operator. After a year, I was promoted 1st Lieutenant and was assigned to the 1st Battalion, 5th Cavalry Division. Went into the commanding officer's bunker at 8 o'clock at night with 3 other officers. We went in alphabetical order. There were no A's, so I went in first, then the other 3 officers. This lieutenant colonel gave us a pep talk of about 2 minutes. He was literally dead on his feet. I don't think he'd slept in 2 days. I have no idea what he said. And afterward, he asked the S1, who was the personnel officer of the battalion, where do we need these officers? And he said, we need 1 in A, 2 in B, and 1 in C. So he said, I guess it doesn't make any difference. And he pointed to me, he said, you go to A, you 2 to B, and the fourth one to C. I was the only officer to complete his tour. The other 3 were either killed or wounded. Afterwards, I had an opportunity to talk to the S1, the personnel officer, and I said, listen, at the 82nd Airborne Division, I was an S1. I was the adjutant of the battalion. He said, well, that's great, because you'll be coming out of the field right about the time I'm ready to go back to the world, back to the United States. And we'll make you the S1 if you survive your tour. Now, this map shows my area of operation up in I Corps. This is the Gulf of Tonkin out here on the east. The black line here is the demilitarized zone, 50 miles wide, 3 miles deep. That's no man's land. And the black line running down the side here is the Ho Chi Minh Trail, adjacent to Laos and Cambodia. So our objective of our division was to prevent infiltration across the DMZ and from Laos. By the way, the story about going in first in my book is called The Luck of Alphabetical Order. This was a free fire zone. There were no friendlies. Anything that moved, you shot it and killed it. I want to talk for a minute about the dichotomy of the war. And if you look at the map of South Vietnam and you flip it 180 degrees, it kind of looks like California. And the dichotomy of the war was that if you were fighting the war in California, the enemy could escape into Oregon and Nevada and Arizona and Mexico. But you had to stay in California. You were not allowed to cross the border into neutral countries. So that's what made it so difficult to fight this war, because the enemy would come down the Ho Chi Minh Trail and they would stage areas along this area, and then when they were prepared, they'd come across the border, attack American forces, and then retreat back across the border. This is my platoon. I was the second oldest in the unit. The oldest man was 24. 80% of these men were draftees. I had no race or drug problems. I had no drug problems because we were out in the boonies and there was no place to get drugs, meaning pot. I want to say a word about the draft. All 18-year-old men were required by federal law to register for the draft, and you had to carry your draft card with you at all times. And initially, decisions were made by the local draft board in your town or in your city. It became very, very political as to who was drafted. Ultimately, it went to a lottery system, which was somewhat fairer. And you could qualify for a deferment from the draft if you were going to college and you kept up your grades and you didn't flunk out. And then if you went on to graduate school, you could get a deferment for graduate school. And then if you got married, you could get a deferment for being married. And then if you had a child, you could get a deferment for having a child. And of course, there were medical deferments such as bone spurs. This is my command group. I call this my badass photograph. And this was my platoon sergeant right here. Now, normally, the platoon sergeant is the most experienced man in the unit with at least 10 years of experience. Mine went through what they called an instant NCO school, 6 months at Fort Benning. And so he and I had about the same level of experience. He had his 19th birthday in Vietnam. This is my radio operator. This is the platoon sergeant's radio operator. This is my medic down here. Now, as you can see here, my radio operator was kind of a small guy, wiry, tough, and he carried a very, very heavy pack. He had the radio, 2 spare batteries, smoke grenades, hand grenades, star clusters, his personal equipment, 2 bandoliers of ammunition, 4 hand grenades, and a .45 pistol and an M16. So he bitched and he moaned and he groaned about how heavy his pack was. So one day, at the base of a very tall hill, more like a mountain, I said, okay, I've had enough of this. I'm switching packs with you, and I will carry it up to the top of the hill. When I got to the top of the hill, we switched packs back, and I never said another word. There were 3 reasons, I think, why I survived my tour. Number 1 was I sat down with my platoon sergeant and my squad leaders, and I said, you guys have got more experience than I. If you see me doing something wrong, I want you to speak up and tell me. I'm still the leader, I'm still the commander, but if you think I'm doing something wrong, I want you to tell me. The second thing I did was not to do stupid stuff. Now that may sound silly, but it was very easy to do stupid stuff. I'll give you an example. I had a fellow officer from the 82nd Airborne Division who was bringing in a helicopter, and the pilot can't see exactly where the skids are, where he's landing. So I have to have somebody there giving him signals, bringing him in to exactly where to land. And he did that by standing on a mound. So when the helicopter landed, the helicopter blades cut off his head. And then the third thing I did is I listened to my point man and my cover man. They were out in single file formation. They're out 50, 75 meters in front of me. And they are the ones who trigger the booby trap. They are the ones who get ambushed or trigger the ambush or discover the ambush before it happens. And by the way, the most popular booby trap was an American hand grenade with the pin pulled, placed inside an American sea ration can with a wire strapped across the trail. That was the enemy's most popular booby trap. So I listened to these men. They would call me forward and say, I just don't, it could be a sixth sense. I just don't feel comfortable about, I'm not hearing any birds, I'm not hearing any monkeys. So I would shoot artillery out in front of our position. This was a technique called reconnaissance by fire. And I shot so much artillery that the battery that supported us put a budget on me of 25 rounds. That's all I could shoot. But that was enough. When you put 25 rounds out in front of them, then the men felt more comfortable about going through. I now want to give you a quick video on firefights and courage.
Follow me in this video to see what it was like to make a helicopter combat assault and be in a firefight in Vietnam. The 1st Cavalry Division had more helicopters than any other division in Vietnam. The idea behind the air mobile concept was to bring fresh fighting forces directly to the battle by helicopter. In a firefight, our units also received immediate support from artillery, Cobra helicopter gunships, and medevac. I was assigned as the 1st Platoon Leader, 1st Battalion, 5th Cavalry Regiment, 1st Cav Division Air Mobile, at the height of the war from 1968 to 1969. I spent 7 months leading 28 men on helicopter assaults and search and destroy missions parallel to the DMZ and I Corps. This was my view as the platoon leader during a helicopter combat assault. I made more than 50 assaults, sometimes twice a day. I always rode in the first helicopter when it was my platoon's turn to lead the assault. The landing zone, or LZ, was chosen to be as close to the enemy force as possible. The assault was designed to engage the enemy so that the Cav's firepower could be brought to bear. This included naval gun bombardment, jets dropping CS gas and napalm, artillery, Cobra helicopters, and additional reinforcements as needed. Even a B-52 strike could be called for if needed. The assault begins with a 5-minute artillery preparation from a battery of 3 105mm howitzers. At the end of this barrage, a white phosphorus round is fired. This is the signal to the Cobra helicopters to begin the attack. There were usually 2 Cobra helicopters supporting an assault. They came in and sprayed the perimeter with rockets and minigun fire. and remained circling overhead to support the landing. The Cobra is a formidable weapon. The pilot sits in the rear seat, slightly elevated above the gunner in the front. The weapon carried 38 rockets, and the minigun could fire 4,000 rounds a minute. This is the door gunner's view of an assault. There was a door gunner on either side of the Huey, carrying M60 machine guns capable of firing hundreds of rounds per minute. Flying on a combat assault was the only time we ever cooled off from the average 105 to 115 degree heat. Sweat dried and we sucked in deep breaths of cold air. But the relief was only temporary. 5 minutes before landing, each man would fire a short burst out the door to make sure his weapon was functioning properly. I always made sure that I had the most firepower in the first helicopter, including my machine gunner, grenadier, medic, squad leader, and radio operator. It was the radio operator's job to immediately notify the battalion commander circling overhead if the LZ was hot or cold. The men on the first helicopters were always in great danger. They wanted to get off the birds as fast as possible and to get to cover. The pilot, too, wanted to pull pitch and get back into the sky for safety. So the men would ride the skids and jump from 10 to 15 feet off of the ground, sometimes falling and resulting in injury. If a helicopter was shot down, the men who survived the crash had to fight it out on their own until their unit could be relieved. Additional helicopters would not be placed at risk when the LZ was hot. If the landing was not contested, patrols were sent out to search for enemy dead and wounded. If they were able to engage, a firefight would ensue, and the entire company would move to attack. In deep jungle, Cobras flying overhead could not see your position on the ground. When calling for artillery support, I made adjustments, lying flat and listening to where the rounds landed, and praying they were not too close. Night firefights were the worst. The VC and NVA owned the night. They would try to penetrate our positions, sending in sappers with satchel charges, trying to destroy the command bunker. It was fearsome and impossible to know what was going on.
I want to say a word about water. Water was at a premium. We basically had enough water to drink and occasionally brush our teeth. We were forbidden to drink from streams. We had no chlorine kits, and there was also the danger of Agent Orange poisoning. We wore the same clothes for 4 to 6 weeks at a time. On one occasion, they flew us, well, you got used to the smell after about 4 or 5 days. On one occasion, they flew clean clothes out to us after 6 weeks, and I got to the clean clothes pile late. So the only pair of pants that was left was size small, and I wore size medium. And on the third day of wearing the size small pants, I stepped over a log and I ripped out the crotch. Now, it was too hot to wear underwear in Vietnam. So the chapter in my book is called Letting It All Hang Out. So after 7 months in the field, I was suddenly informed that the helicopter was coming in with my replacement, and I was to be returned to the rear to become the S1, the personnel officer. I had 15 minutes of preparation. My replacement got off on one side of the helicopter, I got off on the other. I got on the other. So I was understudying the S1, the personnel officer, and on the third day, he came to me and he said, "Did you apply for a job at division headquarters?" And I said, "No." And he said, "Well, I've got orders here that you are to report for an interview with the 15th MHD. And I said, "Okay, what is the 15th MHD?" And he said, I can't repeat it exactly, but he told me to get on a helicopter and go find out. So I flew to our division forward, which is Camp Evans, a base camp of about 12,000 men. And I started asking around, where's the 14th MHD? Nobody knew. Finally, I found a soldier who said, "I think it's down that road about a mile." So I walked down the road, and I finally came to the 14th Military History Detachment. The motto was, "You fight it, we write it." And we had I was interviewed by a captain, and I looked around the office, and I saw a refrigerator with cold Coke and beer. I saw fans. I saw cots with air mattresses. And off the back, they had a shower. I was offered the job, and I took it. This is my happy photo. Our responsibility was to prepare a quarterly after-action report, battle after-action report, and lessons learned. Each of the battalions were required to submit their reports. We took all the reports, edited them, and sent a final report Army-wide. The other responsibility was to attend the division briefing every night. And on one occasion, the Division S3, this is a full colonel at the division level, said, "Is the representative from the 14th Military History Detachment here?" And I stood up and said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Well, we've been having this 3-day battle, and I want you to get on a helicopter tomorrow and go out and talk to the battalion commander, the S3, the operations officer, and the company commander, and figure out what happened, because we have no clue." This was a company of 120 men that was basically decimated by the NVA and lost 80 killed and wounded. So I flew out the next day, and the battalion commander wouldn't talk to me. I was a lowly first lieutenant. The operations officer wouldn't talk to me, but I spent 2 hours with the company commander. And he told me what happened, and I kind of pieced together the battle. And he said that at the end of the battle, the North Vietnam, he said, "We know that we killed hundreds of soldiers, but when the NVA escaped back across the border, they took all their dead and wounded with them." So I wrote up the report, and I put this into the report, and I turned it in to the division operations officer. He threw it back at me, and he said, "I want you to hold the company commander responsible and put in that we killed 456 NVA. You have to remember that commanders in Vietnam, officers, were evaluated by the metric of body count." So after 5 months in this job, an officer should be getting orders. And you fill out a form called a dream sheet. You put down where you would like to be assigned. And I put down that I'd like to be assigned to the West Coast, which for me meant Fort Ord, California, or Fort Lewis, Washington. And I didn't get orders, so I talked my boss into letting me go to Saigon for 3 days to buy art supplies, which we needed. And after 3 days of sightseeing and eating some very good food and buying some art supplies, I figured out, well, I better find out what my orders were. And I asked a bunch of questions, and I finally got to MACV headquarters. That's Military Assistance Command, Vietnam. And I was ushered into a gymnasium, an actual gymnasium with the basketball hoops pulled up. And on the floor of this gymnasium were these low wooden trays. The computer processing of the time was Fortran punch card processing. And every punch card in these low wooden trays was a soldier in Vietnam. So we went down the line alphabetically, A to B to BA, BAR to Bartlett John, Bartlett Peter, Bartlett Robin. You are going to Fort Wainwright in Seattle, Washington. And I said, wait a minute. I went to high school in Seattle, Washington. There is no Fort Wainwright in Seattle, Washington. Are you sure it wasn't Fort Lewis? No, it says here APO Seattle, which means Army Post Office the post office goes through Seattle. We had to get a directory and look up to find out that Fort Wainwright is in Fairbanks, Alaska. So that was my next duty station. When the division moved from I Corps down to 3 Corps, it was common to get rid of all your excess stuff. And I noticed that the office across the road from us, which was the public information officer, had a pile of photographs and artwork. And I went over and I asked him, what are you going to do with this? And he said, we're going to burn it. It's all extra. And I said, well, can I have some of it? And they said, sure, help yourself. So I came away with 3 binders of photographs and artwork. And I wanted to showcase this artwork. So I worked with a good friend of mine to prepare this video. I wrote an article in Vietnam called The Trail, and I wanted to showcase the artwork. It starts slowly.
The Trail. The trail is only a meter wide and weaves its way through thick green and brown underbrush, so overgrown that even a jackrabbit would have trouble threading its way. Large thorny limbs form a matted barrier as you strain, push, shove, and bleed to get through. Wait a minute vines seem to take special pleasure in tripping you, spraining your ankle, causing you to swear. With each conquering, a new thicket presents itself, as though to say, "You made it through that one, now try me." As the trail wears on, your sore muscles, aching feet and back, cry out for relief from a 40-pound pack filled with sea rations, ammunition, canteens, and combat equipment. 10-minute breaks ease the pain for a short while, and then you're numb again. Rest is a beautiful dream. You must conserve water, so you sip sweet mouthfuls, allowing it to run slowly down your cotton, dry throat. If you stop sweating, the dirt cakes on your arms and face, and you can't spare the water to wash it off. It's time to push on, waddling like a pregnant woman. The trail is a struggle between mind and body. The two fight every step, clawing a trough, your brain forcing you on. Your mind is filled with thoughts, home, cold beer, women, but ever alert for any noise, any false movement, anything out of the ordinary along the trail. There are so many things to remember. Keep alert, stay alive. You must kill him first. You must pull the trigger first, and you must be fast. But the trail pulls you down. Eyes droop, sweat drips into them, the salt burning and stinging. Dirty hands rub the tears away, and nails, bitten to the quick, scratch the mosquito bites from the night before. Alert! Alert! Keep your head up. Breathe deep. Don't think about home. Don't think about anything except staying alive. Forget the pain, the aching muscles, the tired feet. Clear your mind. Protect your life. Don't let the trail win. The perspiration runs in big dirty drops off the stock of your M16 rifle. Your hands push the thorns aside. You work your body through, but your pack catches. You pull. Thorns cut across your shoulders. Damn! But keep following that little green trail. Keep pushing. Keep pushing. Feet obeying a harsh command. Listen. Alert. The jungle is quiet, and only an occasional monkey screams out, making you jump and duck. You follow the trail by feel, toes pointing forward, searching for vines and roots. Your eyes scan to the front, watching for movement. Ears strain like radar, listening for the click of a safety being released. Their weapons sound like popcorn exploding. Listen for popcorn. Your knees are bent, limp, ready to drop face flat in a split second as you walk the trail. The trail is life. Pain, frustration, wishes, agony, and death. You get to know it well, and you learn quickly what life means, and how precious it is, and how much you took it for granted before. The trail changes many lives. It ends some, too.
So my last story is about this artwork. And I showed this video at a meeting of the New York, New Jersey chapter in 2006. This was even before I wrote the book. And there was a veteran service officer in the audience who came up to me and said, "Gee, I think I know the artist who drew this picture, and I'm going to put him in touch with you. And I was busy talking to the other soldiers and talking about the artwork. I had brought the original artwork with me. And about 3 weeks later, I mean, I didn't give it much thought. About 3 weeks later, I'm driving out to the University of Scranton to visit my son. Sorry, he didn't go to CMC. And I get a cell phone call. And he says, "Hi, this is Johnny Johnson. I understand you've used my artwork in your video." And I go, "Uh-oh." Now, I knew that artwork and photography taken in a combat zone was in the public domain, but I didn't know if he knew it. So I said, "Well, listen, I'm driving. Let me get off the road. I'll call you back." He said, "Well, wait a minute. I haven't seen the video. Where is it?" So I gave him the URL to YouTube. Got off the highway and got some gasoline, called him back, and he said, "I am so proud to be in your video." And we talked, swapped some stories. And at the end of our conversation, he said to me, "Welcome home, brother." And frankly, that was the first time in 27 years that anyone had ever said, "Welcome home" to me. So my challenge to you tonight is to remember these code words. They are very significant to Vietnam veterans. They are very meaningful because we were not welcomed home. We were spat upon. We were castigated as baby killers. We refused to wear our uniforms in public, and we hid our military service in our civilian careers. Now, there's nothing wrong with saying thank you for your service. It's a fine sentiment. But as Vietnam veterans start to walk in the boots of our World War II and Korean veterans, remember these code words. It will demonstrate that you understand and empathize with the sacrifice that we made for our fellow soldiers, for our families, for our country, and for you. They will move us. It's a game changer. Thank you very much. So I'd be happy to take some questions as long as they're not too tough. I had some tough ones at this table today, I'll tell you.
So if you would like to ask a question, we invite you to come up to the mic. If someone's already standing here, we ask that you please line up on the side. And if you could please say your first and last name, your school, your year, and your major, and then share your brief question. Thank you so much. Oh, yes. And then if you are unable to come up to the mic and would like me to come to you, I'm more than happy to. Just raise your hand and I'll come find you.
If you don't ask a question, I'll show you some more slides.
Good evening. Thank you for being here and welcome home. My name is Eli. I am a second-year student here studying government and philosophy. I'd like to ask you, given everything that we've learned, and you referenced this a bit with the Walter Cronkite quote, given what we've learned since the war about the fact that some of our leaders knew that we weren't going to win, and knew some of the terrible things that were going on, right? You mentioned the story of the person saying we should say we killed 450 people, things like that. Has your perspective on your experience or your fellow soldiers' experiences changed in light of the knowledge that maybe you were being put into a situation that your leaders knew was unwinnable? Thanks you.
Yes, the answer to that question is yes. I was wounded in a fairly severe night firefight. And it was one of these crazy things where I had done everything by the book, and maybe that was the problem. We were crossing a rice paddy dike, and the protocol was to send two people across, have they check the other side. They did that. They flashed us with the red filter on the lights, and the enemy waited until we were fully exposed along this rice paddy dike, opened fire with machine gun and mortars. And I lost about 4 men killed immediately. and several wounded. I called in artillery, and as the rounds landed, I put my arm up on the rice paddy. Fortunately, there was this rice paddy dike, which is like concrete, that protected us somewhat. I put my arm up on the dike, and a mortar round went off on the other side, caught me in the shoulder, kicked me back. I lost my helmet, and I ended up kind of on my knees, and I was looking. I said, why are the tracers going away from me? I had my back to the contact. About that time, another mortar round went off in front of me. Fortunately for me, it was a muddy, wet rice paddy. So the mortar round actually penetrated the ground when it exploded, and then I just got this tremendous blast of muddy dirt water. Got another piece of shrapnel in the groin. But I fell backwards, no helmet, knocked me out. I was out cold. So fortunately, my squad leader saved the day, pulled us back, repositioned all the soldiers. We called the company. They were coming to reinforce us. But I was out cold, and I had blood on my shirt, blood all on my pants. They thought I was dead, and they put me in the dead pile. And I woke up, and I sat up, and nobody saw me. It was pitch black, and I fainted, and I fell back down. Second time I moaned, and somebody said, hey, he's not dead. So fortunately, then they were able to put a bandage on me. In answer to your question, I lay there from about 10 o'clock at night till 6 o'clock the next morning, having a very long talk with myself about whether or not, if I should die right at this point in time, whether it would be worth it. And the answer came back no. That my life had more meaning than what I was doing. And this was a complete reversal for me. I stayed in the Army for quite a long period of time. After that, I was a regular Army officer. But that's another story, why I ultimately decided to resign. But that was a changing point for me right there, lying on the ground.
Thanks.
Hi, Mr. Bartlett. Thank you so much for your talk and for being here today. I'm Brian. I'm a senior at CMC, and I'm from Singapore, so I served in the conscript army as well, also commissioned as a light infantry platoon officer. So when you were mentioning about how your NCOs and your platoon sergeant is much more like experienced than you, how do you, training is one thing, but being in a firefight is another. How do you, command the respect of your men and of NCOs that are way more experienced than you, and how do you show courage in a firefight, basically? Thank you.
So the officer is in charge, right? And in a firefight with the bullets flying overhead, every man in that platoon, you could feel their eyes on you. They were looking at you, and they wanted you to make a decision. It didn't have to be right or wrong, but they wanted a decision. And I probably would never have been a really good commander, because my decision was always to protect my men and not put them in harm's way. And if I had a wounded man and I had the choice between helping that wounded man and saving his life versus attacking the enemy, I tried to save the life. And other commanders would have said, that's wrong, you need to attack the enemy and overcome the situation. Now, obviously, we had to lay down a base of fire and overcome the ambush or whatever the situation might have been. But ultimately, I would say also that I was a far better staff officer than a commander. I was much better with the paperwork and the administrative stuff than I was leading the men. That's something I learned about myself. At the same time, my wife says that my greatest strength is that I am fearless. And my greatest weakness is that I'm fearless. And often that has gotten me in trouble, because I felt that I had more experience than my civilian managers. And I did. I had more life experience, let's put it that way. So that's what I took away from that experience. But I hope that kind of answers your question.
It does. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Olivia. I'm a senior here. Thank you so much for your talk. It was truly an honor to listen to you tonight. I was just wondering, you briefly mentioned that people warned you not to make really close relationships with the people that you were with in Vietnam. And I was wondering how you did navigate that. And then when you came home, how did those relationships evolve and if you're still in touch with people?
So we wore no insignia on our uniforms. The only way you knew I was an officer is on the band that went around my helmet. It said LT Bartlett. My call sign was Foggy Day 1-6. So people called me either 1-6 or LT. We used nicknames and numbers. My platoon sergeant was 1-5. The squad leaders were 1-1, 1-2, and then there was Cowboy, and everybody had a nickname. A lot of people had nicknames. So you never knew who the person's name was. And I have men on the wall, but I don't know who they are because I never learned their name. And that's sad. That's kind of bad. So that was one of the challenges that we had. And as an officer, I knew that there were times when I really had to give an order. I didn't intentionally want to put somebody in harm's way, but it happened. And we didn't have body bags, as it was mentioned. That was a tough job. It was very, very hard. And I put a lot of men wrapped them into ponchos. And I've never forgotten that. That was the hardest job I had. And my men would not do it. There might have been superstition. Maybe they thought if they helped out, they'd be next. So they'd bring the body back to me, but I was the one that had to fill out that card, put it on their boot, wrap them in the poncho. I carried a ball of twine because the ponchos would flap in the helicopter rotor wash. So I'd actually tie the poncho around the head and the neck and the feet. Now that's tough to do, you know, when you think about it. You're wrapping a man in a dead man. So, and some of these men were very badly mutilated when they were, because their weapons and our weapons were incredibly powerful. We called our ammunition pregnant 22s. If you know what a 22 round looks like, it has a very small bullet, but this thing had the round for the M16 had a tremendous amount of power behind it, powder. And when it sometimes if it would go through the body, you'd also hit the man behind him. And if it went into the body, it would hit bone and tumble. So when you killed somebody, it was pretty horrendous, both ways.
Thank you.
Okay. John said to keep it to 50 minutes. I did.
I'm John Devereaux, class of 57, 10 years ahead of you, but also behind you in this regard tonight for sure. Thanks for your talk. I want to ask you a question. I knew a colonel, I'm from Hawaii, and when I was home one summer, I was walking back from the beach and I went by his home. He lived down in a gully and he had a white American flag up, and I didn't know who he was, but I walked down to his house. Excuse me. And he'd been in Vietnam, and we got talking, and he said that he was a colonel, but he was not allowed to be a higher rank because he would not count the bodies, or would not have his men go out and count the bodies. And that's always bothered me. He's now in Arlington. He's gone. Unfortunately, he was a great person. I got to know him very well, but that's one thing that's concerned me about how we handled the war in Vietnam. Could you respond to that, please?
Well, about the only thing I know is that if you added up the body counts that were reported in all these after-action reports that we put together from not only our division, but all the divisions in Vietnam, we killed more people than existed in North Vietnam. So it was not uncommon to exaggerate the body count. And as I said, that was the metric by which commanders got promoted and by which they were judged. So it happened. Every battle, we had to win every battle, and we had to kill more of them than they killed of us. It was just routine.
I have a question. I'm not going to weave through the people because the chairs are so close, so I'm just going to do it from here. I'm Melanie Kalla. I'm a senior at CMC, and I'm studying international relations with a focus on the Middle East. I found one of the most emotionally compelling parts of your story was talking about, obviously, welcome home, and how veterans of the Vietnam War were not welcomed home. So I'm curious to hear how veterans of the Vietnam War formed community amongst themselves to cushion that blow, and your experiences within that community, and perhaps even fostering that community through things like your book.
So I went to lunch today with my classmate, Bob Novell, and as we left the little restaurant that we went to, there was a gentleman who came up, and he was wearing his Vietnam veteran hat. It said Vietnam veteran, so I knew he was a Vietnam veteran. And I said, welcome home. And I stopped him in his tracks. It hit him face front. And we shook hands, and he said, were you in Vietnam? And I said, yes, and we exchanged some words. So very, very powerful words. And many Vietnam veterans take offense at the term, thank you for your service, because they don't feel that the person who is offering those words mean it. And that's why the words welcome home are so significant to us. As far as veteran groups are concerned, you know, most veterans do not talk about Vietnam. For years and years and years, I never talked about Vietnam, and it haunted me. I had pretty heavy duty PTSD to the point where I was having daydreams, not nightmares, but daydreams about an incident that happened to me. And I felt like I was losing control. But fortunately, I had a good friend who I helped get published, and she was a psychiatrist. And I happened to be in her area, and I went to see her. We had dinner, and the next day I said, I want to have an appointment with you. And for 3 hours, I talked about this incident that was really bothering me. And she gave me some very simple exercises to practice to make this thing not go away per se, but to soften it. And in talking with other Vietnam veterans, I would say that one of the most common things they say is that rarely does a day go by that some aspect of that war comes to mind. And it's true for me too. Rarely does a day, and you know when it happens to me? Believe it or not, when I'm brushing my teeth. I don't know why, but there's something about brushing my teeth. Something comes back to us. And when we get together, we do talk about it. And some men do unburden themselves. But for the most part, it's very similar to firefighters and police who have had traumatic situations, and you just carry that with you. You have to suck it up and carry it with you. You know, I think the Army and civilian world is becoming more attuned to PTSD and doing something about it, but often soldiers won't want to go through that. It's just part of the job, I guess. I don't know.
Hi there. I'm a senior at CMC. Was it challenging knowing that there were many Americans shirking their responsibility to serve?
Say that again. I didn't.
Was it challenging knowing that there were many Americans that were, through valid or invalid exemptions,
Were
shirking?
deferred?
Yeah.
Yeah, I
While
mean,
you guys
it
were
became
facing these challenges.
you know, they were all, as I mentioned, right after that Tet Offensive, there was a dramatic change in popular opinion, and it was students. I mentioned 18-year-olds men had to sign up for the draft, and you had to carry your draft notice with you. And the popular opinion and campus protest escalated dramatically after that. And it's true that many people were able to avoid the draft for various reasons, and did so. Some went to Canada. We had a whole slew of people that left and went to Canada. There's some parallels that are being drawn to today. So, but the 18-year-olds who were drafted said they went, at least the ones that I encountered, served honorably. I had good troops, good soldiers. I didn't have any problems, any racial problems, drug problems. I mean, they carried out the assignments that I gave them, and it was a very maturing experience. So many of them profited from it. I don't think they stayed in the service, but many of them profited from it. Yes, sir. Mr. Noel.
I went to Germany. I didn't have to go to Vietnam. I was not combat qualified because of my eyes. But I think as I listen, and I'm listening to all the young people, all the older people that are here, we have to think about what we listen to tonight. This is historic. And the things that are going to happen are not going to happen by me. I'm 81 years old, or how old am I, Sharon? 79. I got a serious memory problem. But the fact is, you've listened to history tonight, and I'm not telling you to do something, but it's something that you're going to have to think about. That our country has to think about. This isn't going to go away. So, Robin, good job.
With that wonderful statement, we are going to close. Thank you so much for such an incredible talk, and thank you to each of you for attending the Athenaeum tonight. We look forward to seeing you again. And we would also like to encourage you, if you loved this talk, purchase a book where you have the wonderful opportunity to have a discount on this book, and you have the priceless opportunity to have it signed by the author
There you
himself.
go.
So if you would like to do that, we encourage you to go to the back of the Athenaeum to purchase the book and talk with the author.
Someday could be very famous, right?